So today we're going to dig into something big. We're talking about a fundamental shift in how immigration law is actually being enforced in the United States. It's a story about a new playbook that states are using, a major collision between federal and local power, and of course, the very real human costs that come with it.
And really, everything we're talking about, it all boils down to this one simple question. This used to be something that, constitutional lawyers would debate. But now, it's happening in real time right now across the country. What actually happens when those lines between state and federal power start to get blurry?
You see, a whole new playbook is taking shape. States are no longer just sitting on the sidelines when it comes to immigration. Not at all. They're actively using their own power, their own resources to carry out federal priorities. And that, right there, is a massive shift in the traditional balance of power.
And if you want to see the blueprint for this new approach, well, you got to look at Texas. Policies like Senate Bill 8, they're not just making a political point. No, they are the architectural plans for turning state and local agencies into, essentially, arms of federal immigration enforcement. Let's break down exactly how it works.
Okay, so how is this even possible, legally speaking? Well, it all hinges on this provision in U.S. immigration law called 287G. It sounds technical, but it's pretty straightforward. It basically lets the federal government, specifically ICE, deputize state and local cops, giving them the authority to act like federal immigration officers.
And this strategy has a pretty stark name, the jails as choke points model. It starts with something simple, a local arrest, maybe for a minor offense. Then, the local jail holds that person for ICE. And just like that, the local jail becomes a direct on-ramp to the federal deportation pipeline.
So what's the end game here? Is to take all the friction, all the individual choices out of the system. By welding state arrests directly to federal processing, it turns what used to be a bunch of decisions by local officials into one single, automatic, institutional machine.
Now, Texas isn't alone in this. Florida's getting in on the action too, but they're doing it a little differently. See, Texas uses this top-down command and control approach. Florida, on the other hand, uses more of an incentive-based model to encourage cooperation. Florida's way might be a bit clunkier operationally, but it's also designed to be harder to challenge in court. Two states, same goal, just different roads to get there.
Okay, so we've been talking a lot about policy and legal frameworks, right? But this stuff doesn't just live on paper. It hits the streets, and sometimes the consequences are tragic. So now we're going to shift from the abstract architecture of the law to a specific, heartbreaking flashpoint where this policy met the pavement. Let's set the scene. The date is January 7th, 2026. The place is Minneapolis, a city with a very complex history when it comes to policing. The stage is absolutely set for a major confrontation.
And that's when it happens. An ICE agent shoots and kills Renee Good. She's 37 years old, a U.S. citizen, a mother of 3. And this all goes down during a big federal immigration surge in a city that calls itself a sanctuary. The tension between local and federal authorities was already a powder keg just waiting for a spark.
And you know what happens next? In the chaos that follows, two totally different, completely conflicting stories emerge about what happened in those fatal moments. One from the feds, and a very different one from local officials and the people who saw it happen.
So on one side, you have the Department of Homeland Security. They paint Renee Good as a domestic terrorist who used her car as a weapon. They say the agent had no choice but to fire in self-defense. But then you have the local account, which claims Good was acting as a legal observer, just watching the icy activity. Witnesses say she was actually trying to drive away when she was shot.
So how did the mayor of Minneapolis, Jacob Frey, react to the federal government story? Well, his response was, let's just say it was blunt. That one word tells you everything you need to know about the massive gap in trust between local and federal officials at that moment.
You see, an incident like the one in Minneapolis does more than just cause a tragedy. It's like a massive stress test on this entire enforcement system. It pushes all the legal and logistical frameworks to their absolute breaking point and forces everyone to look at the inevitable fallout. And you can bet the legal challenges are already lining up. In fact, we can almost map it out. The first lawsuits are expected to come from sheriffs in big cities who are really pushing back against these models. By 2026, 2027, you can expect these court battles to really heat up, maybe even pulling in the Department of Justice.
So, what's the legal argument against all this? Well, it really comes down to the 10th Amendment and a doctrine with a kind of clunky name, anti-commandeering. Basically, Supreme Court cases like Prince v. United States have established that the federal government can't just force state officials to do its bidding and carry out federal law. And this right here, this reveals a really crucial piece of the puzzle. A core feature of this entire playbook is to ramp up federal enforcement without needing to ask Congress for another dime. The whole idea is to use state and local budgets to do the federal government's work.
And that brings us full circle, right back to where we started. When you have state power and federal priorities colliding like this, the friction is just immense. This new playbook is completely re-engineering the balance of power, and it leaves us with one critical question. When it all shakes out, who is the one that ultimately bears the cost?